lot of attention is given to the stock market and real estate sector. But what if I told you there's a market that has more influence on your daily life, from how much interest you pay back on your loans, to the price of basic commodities, all the way to the returns on your investment and retirement accounts? Yet, despite having the power to steer the future of an entire nation, this market is largely ignored as it doesn't make for clickbait-worthy headlines, and there's barely any finance bros flexing how they bought a Bugatti before they sell you a course on how to beat the market and escape the matrix.
Well, what color's your Bugatti? Oh, fuck off then.
Today, we'll be diving into the bond market in all its glory, because if you don't understand bonds, you don't understand money. The name is bond. Treasury bonds. A bond is a fixed income instrument that represents a loan made by an investor to a borrower, usually a government or a corporation. Just like a company or a household, the government needs money to run effectively. Now, accounting offers any entity two ways to finance its assets. You can make a purchase either using your own money, equity or capital, or borrow other people's money, i.e. take on debt. Simple, right? But the second option has a cost attached to it because of what we call the time value of money. You see, $1 today is worth more than $1 10 years from now. Therefore, you will have to compensate your borrowing by paying interest on top of the original amount that you borrowed, the principal. These interest payments are a cost to you. Therefore, you will expense them, and already you can see that borrowing only makes sense under certain conditions. When your revenues are enough to cover the interest payments and leave a healthy profit margins, or when the interest rates are so low that it makes sense to borrow instead of using your own money. Governments think and operate in the same way.
They must have a budget too.
Aye, that they do. That they do.
But with one big caveat: they have the ability to print their own money.
Uncle Scrooge, why don't they just print up a few billion or so?
A few billion?
Politicians oftentimes end up spending more than the government collects because of one main incentive: they don't have to pay for their borrowing. You see, the main way a government makes money is by collecting taxes.
Income tax?
Aye, though taxes are a pain in the whatchamacallit, this right here, the wallet. Taxes are the funds governments must get to run their households and keep out of debt.
This is a fatal flaw of the bond system, as it gives politicians the power to borrow seemingly endless amounts of money right now, but at the expense of later generations who will have to come up with the taxes to pay up. Furthermore, as our political system is structured with term limits and elections, politicians are further incentivized to borrow as much as they can while they can, and sadly, due to the high amounts of corruption in our country, most of this borrowing is not going to building necessary infrastructure or providing the services necessary to raise tax revenue in the future. Government debt is no longer an investment into the economy, but a way to finance political corruption. Consider this: when the next batch of politicians comes in, they are faced with two options: either default on the promises made or inflate the money away. The major issue with the first option is that once a country has defaulted on its debts, it becomes very difficult to raise money in the future, as investors, foreign and local, will not trust the debt promise, and the country's risk profile is adjusted higher, resulting to higher interest rates. Therefore, governments across the world have become accustomed to the second option: inflating the debt away.
Inflation?
Ah, that's a mess. Your money would be worth less and less.
This means that when payday comes, the government central bank can print more money to settle the interest and principal payments by issuing more debt. This is only possible because the Kenya shilling is what we call a fiat currency, meaning it is not backed by any physical assets or commodities. In fact, from August 15th, 1971, all government-issued currencies in the world became fiat currencies when President Nixon dropped the US gold standard.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
By dismantling the Bretton Woods system, which had been in place since 1944, that pegged the US dollar to physical gold, priced at $35 per ounce, and pegged all other currencies to the US dollar.
Now, what does this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you?
Since then, the value of fiat currencies has been derived only from the laws of supply and demand, and supply has been rising ever since. The way governments do this is by borrowing more money, and that is another fatal flaw of the system. It always leads to more borrowing. You see, you're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and then when Peter asks for his money, you head back to Paul, but this time you end up borrowing some more to cover the interest, and this is literally what happened back in 2024.
Speaking of money, how about the $20 you owe me?
Oh, yeah? Well, I only got 10, so here's 10 and I owe you 10.
Thanks.
Hey, Mo, you owe me 20.
Well, here's 10 and I'll owe you 10.
You owe me 20.
Here's 10, I owe you 10.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Good, now we're all even.
On 12 February 2024, Kenya tapped the international bond market to raise funds to buy back a 10-year Eurobond of 2 billion shillings that was scheduled to mature in June. If this had not panned out, then the Kenya government would have had to use its own foreign exchange reserves, which are too low, or otherwise resort to loans from other lenders like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, which have already lent to the government extensively. The success of the new Eurobond had an immediate impact on the Kenya shilling's exchange rate, and the currency appreciated more than 9% in a few days. This event revealed the actual reason why the Kenya shilling had appreciated massively in the previous months. The market feared that Kenya's shallow foreign exchange reserves would be used to repay the Eurobond maturing in June, leaving the country broke. While the currency's bounce back looks like a positive arrangement, it is not. It is merely kicking the can down the road, because the yield at issuance of the new $1.5 billion Eurobond was 10.375% with a coupon rate of 9.75%, which is way higher than the 6.3% coupon rate of Kenya's last Eurobond issuance in 2021. Now the country is locked into higher coupon repayments, and I don't know about you, but I have not spotted any massive economic developments that will put us in a better position to repay the principal when the bond matures in 2031. Furthermore, this bond only covers 1.5 billion of the 2 billion Eurobond, leaving $500 million on the table. And an interesting question: how did the government pay up? The World Bank, of course. To quote the Central Bank of Kenya Governor Kamau Tuge, we do expect some disbursements from the World Bank of about $1.2 billion related to the development policy operations. Part of that will be used to settle the $500 million of the remaining Eurobond.
I got 10, so here's 10 and I owe you 10.
Thanks.
Hey, Mo, you owe me 20.
Well, here's 10 and I'll owe you 10.
You owe me 20.
What I do know is that our political elites will continue to borrow more debt, and the cycle goes on and on, leading us into a debt trap. I believe that is where we're headed to. Or perhaps we're already there. Now, I know you've probably heard that bonds are the safest investment out there. Actually, in finance, the interest rate on bonds is called the risk-free rate. But, like everything in life, there's always risk. Bonds bear within them two main risks, and we've already gone through them. One is that the government will not be able to pay up its debts. We're already seeing the signs of this, with the Kenyan debt to GDP level climbing past 70%, way above the recommended 50% threshold. Debt servicing costs now make up 67.1% of the 2.15 trillion Kenyan shillings in revenues collected as at the end of May 2025. This got even worse as debt repayments in the last 3 months to September 2025 gobbled up 92% of tax collections. To add insult to injury, the rise in debt servicing costs comes at an expense of necessary services the government is meant to provide. The second risk is that inflation will rise faster as government prints more money into circulation due to all the borrowing.
When debts become very large and there is an economic downturn, and the empire can no longer borrow the money necessary to repay its debts, the financial bubble bursts. This creates great domestic hardships and forces the country to choose between defaulting on its debts or printing a lot of new money. It always chooses to print a lot of new money, at first gradually and eventually massively. That devalues the currency and raises inflation,
therefore reducing bondholders' real returns, as the coupon rate on bonds is normally fixed. Already for the financial year 2025-2026, the national government's projected revenue is 3.38 trillion against expenditures of 4.27 trillion, and that deficit of nearly $1 trillion shillings will be filled by, you guessed it, more debt. Yet, as we speak, public debt has hit an all-time high of 12.4 trillion Kenyan shillings, nearly 6 months after it first hit the 12 trillion mark for the first time in the country's history. In fact, since 2019, Kenya's debt level has roughly doubled with no end in sight, as the IMF projects the debt to GDP ratio rising further to 71.6% in 2026 and 72.4% in 2027 due to the persistent annual budget deficits. On a separate note, does anyone else find it weird that the CBK just stopped posting official debt figures after 2021? Anyway, unlike a business, government does not bear the burden of efficiently producing goods and services that the market demands, which leaves it with taxes as its primary revenue generator, hence the constant rise in taxes. While you and I might look at this problem and draw a very simple conclusion: spend less, borrow less, and the budget will soon balance itself.
In budgeting a home and a government too, it really should show a profit to you. Something should be left when the payments are through, when you plan the budget.
Always remember to save a slice for yourself
when you plan the budget.
It is highly unlikely that our politicians will ever do this. I hope you understand that economics is simple.
It's a question of economics.
Economics?
Aye, it only means household management. It's from an old Greek word. Household management, that's budgeting, do you ken?
Budgeting?
Aye, financial discipline. Let's say your income is like a pie. There's a piece for everything you buy. Cut portions wisely, don't be unnerved, or it will all be gone before everyone is served.
It is the politics that have made this a difficult and complicated matter. The government is incentivized to run larger budget deficits, then raise more and more taxes and borrow more and more debt. If there's one thing you have to understand about economics, it's that it's about incentives. As long as the political incentive remains to spend more, therefore pushing for more borrowing, which leads to bigger budget deficits next year, thus pushing for even more borrowing, thus reinforcing the debt cycle into a debt trap that can bankrupt the nation, the politicians will still continue borrowing no matter the logic against it. Kind of like a game of musical chairs. Everyone wants to dance all night, forgetting the music will soon stop. And that brings us to where we are today, a nation headed towards this massive iceberg.
Iceberg, right ahead! Thank you. Iceberg, right ahead! Stop!
The Titanic didn't sink because of a lack of information. It sank because of a lack of direction.
Why are they turning?
The captain's crew received several ice warnings, yet they decided to travel at nearly full speed in an unknown icy terrain at night, making it difficult to divert the ship once the iceberg came in sight. Only 37 seconds passed between the iceberg being spotted and the eventual collision, and the rest, as they say, is history. And what they also say about history is that it might not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Kenya has received several warnings, domestic and foreign, about its unsustainable debt levels, especially in this unstable economic environment amidst a multitude of global crises. But still, the captain and his crew continue to blow full steam ahead, and who knows when that iceberg will finally pop up. With this channel, I want to build a community of smart investors who are aware of this reality and adjust their lives accordingly. Please check the description for a link to my newsletter where I try and simplify complicated financial concepts that you can use to plan for your future. Because at the end of the day, the best and safest investment you can make is not in government bonds, but in yourself, so that even if the ship sinks, you can still swim. Plus, if this information is valuable to you, I'm sure it is valuable to your friends and family. So please send them this video. It's referrals like this that help us fight against the gatekeepers of the financial system.
Oh, it's simple, isn't it simple? Yet you have to understand it to survive. All the facts you must digest if you're thinking to invest the remarkable sum of $1.95.
Oh, it's simple. Isn't it simple?
In finance, like all other areas of life, you need to understand the concept of risk and how to use it to your advantage. The reason bond interest rates are termed risk-free, unlike corporate bonds, is that the government by definition has legitimate coercive power over the issuancy of currency. This is what we mean when we say a currency has legal tender. Due to this, the entire financial sector is pegged on the yield levels, the returns, in the bond market. Because who would want to risk their money in the stock market or on real estate when they can lend their money to the government for a safe, risk-free return? So this boils the sector down to one simple investment question that cannot be ignored. That is a question of trust. Right now, people just trust the government will pay them back. But this is not always true.
Economists argue that excessive spending is the real culprit. Ghana's debt is projected to hit a staggering 99% of GDP by the end of 2023. The local currency, the cedi, has devalued nearly 60% against the US dollar since 2020, driving up import costs. This while government spending has ballooned.
We went on a binge, a borrowing binge. So we borrowed for projects that were consumption. We borrowed for projects that the return, we didn't have a second look at the return on capital. We didn't get value for money because of corruption. And we kept borrowing and borrowing because we were the darling boys of the Eurobond market. And then we crashed. Our story is no different from Greece or Argentina or all those countries in the past that have followed the same path.
Now, protest organizers allege the problems run even deeper to systemic government corruption. Stories of ministers amassing millions in unexplained wealth lend credence to these claims. With inflation topping 50% and food costs skyrocketing, everyday Ghanaians are struggling to survive. Demonstrations continue across Ghana in response to the worsening economic conditions. Ghana's deal with the IMF is seen as a lifeline, but citizens want sweeping reforms.
We are here and we will fight. If no one cares, the youth cares. And when the youth cares, then the country must care.
The immense power of this market, the bond market, can literally reshape an economy.
Surviving meant waking up as early as 2 in the morning, trekking to the nearest ATM, and then waiting in line. On a good day, you'd be able to withdraw the equivalent of about $1 or $2 US, the maximum allowed by the government. Or you might find, after losing sleep and waiting for hours, that no more money was left. That's because around 2007, Zimbabwe experienced the second highest inflation in history, after post-war Hungary. It's hard to know exactly how bad it got, as the government stopped reporting numbers after 100,000% inflation, when a loaf of bread cost 30 billion Zimbabwean dollars. Employees stopped going to work when their annual salary wouldn't even pay for their bus ride home. And vending machines were put out of service, unable to hold the billions of coins that a single can of soda would cost. To keep up, the central bank kept printing bigger and bigger banknotes. $1 million, 100 billion, and finally 100 trillion, worth a whole 40 US cents.
It is easy enough to forget that our economy has been reshaped from a well-functioning, properly structured emerging market poised to be the epicenter of East Africa to a crumbling, corrupt banana republic. In an economy such as ours, government debt is not about raising finances to improve productivity and livelihoods, but a credit card handed to the political class on an account with seemingly no credit limit. Then every few years, the credit card is passed down to another administration that continues to swipe away our futures as they roll over the principal and interest payments as long as they can. At this point, I should mention that people will say, if you can't beat them, then join them. Because as Ray Dalio says,
one man's debts are another man's assets.
But while it may seem that these bonds are good investments, you must factor in the risks associated with them.
So in order to hold the debt, it has to be attractive.
Due to the higher risk of default and inflation, these bonds often offer higher yields than their developed country counterparts. And while many investors, domestic and foreign, seem to benefit from this risk, it is often a mirage of growth. Bondholders will think that they are achieving greater returns, but in real terms, once you factor in inflation, currency devaluation, unstable institutions, declining productivity, and economic uncertainty, just to name a few, they're barely scraping by. Actually, to tie to my previous video on the hidden truth about the wealth gap, it is this constant borrowing in a bid to fill the annual national budget deficits that increases the money supply, therefore imposing a hidden tax on Kenyan citizens in the form of inflation. This erosion of the currency's purchasing power redistributes wealth from hard-working savers and, yes, fixed income bondholders like you and I, to the closest source of new money, i.e. borrowers with collateral.
Oh, it's simple! Isn't it simple? In the proper hands, your money is alive.
All the facts you must digest if you're thinking to invest the remarkable sum of $1.95.
Now, laddies, is everything clear?
No.
To quote the Greeks, it is only when old men plant trees the shade of which they know they will never sit in, that a society grows great. Kenya is in decline because previous generations did not just fail to plant these trees, they have and continue to systematically dismantle the institutions that form the bedrock of a developed economy. What has happened since independence is a constant rolling over of government debt to the next generation as the old men siphon the funds to their international portfolios and leave the rest of us to carry the debt burden on our impoverished backs. They've chosen Gucci belts and Miami mansions at the expense of the long-term prosperity of the nation. They didn't just fail to plant trees, they cut the trees and sold them for a few pennies and trinkets. Then they sold the land upon which the forest once covered and indebted us to foreign masters and fled to lands far away, leaving us in the horrid dust to rot under the scorching sun. So, do you still think government bonds are risk-free investments?